Rich man tries to saw his 4-year-old daughter in half, but the horse saw everything and did something. Comment on what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The afternoon sun dipped behind the Appalachian Mountains as Theodore Ted Marcondes trudged toward the dilapidated barn at the back of his property. His heavy footsteps echoed on the packed dirt floor, and sweat trickled down his forehead, not just from the late afternoon heat in rural West Virginia, but from the tension gripping his robust 52-year-old body. In his arms, he carried Isadora, his 4-year-old daughter. The girl was unnaturally quiet, with that vacant stare that irritated him so. Her brown hair stuck to her face with sweat, and she wore a little blue dress that had seen better days. Ted gritted his teeth, observing the child's empty expression. Once again, she didn't respond to his calls, didn't show any normal reaction a child her age should have. For weeks, doctors in Charleston had confirmed his worst fears. The words still echoed in his ears like hammer blows. Severe cognitive impairment, compromised development, permanent special needs. For a man like Ted, who had built a rural empire based on strength and determination, those words represented the end of everything he had fought for. His ranch stretched for hundreds of acres, the result of decades of hard work and not always honest dealings, prime cattle, thriving crops, modern machinery. All of it would be hers one day. But how could a child like this manage such a responsibility? How could she continue the Marcondes family legacy? The barn loomed closer, its old wooden walls creaking in the wind. Ted had chosen this location strategically, far from the main house, surrounded by dense woods that would muffle any sound. Inside the barn, a chainsaw awaited him on a makeshift workbench. His plan was simple and cruel, to simulate a tragic accident, a curious child playing where she shouldn't, a moment of carelessness, an inexplicable tragedy. He placed Isadora on the dirt floor of the barn. The girl remained where she was put, her brown eyes fixed on some undefined point in front of her. She didn't cry, didn't ask where she was, didn't show fear. This constant passivity was exactly what enraged Ted. The most, a normal daughter would run, scream, question him. But Isadora just existed, like a silent shadow haunting his conscience as a failed father. Ted picked up the chainsaw, feeling the weight of the equipment in his calloused hands. For a moment, he hesitated. Even with all his coldness, this was his daughter, the blood of his blood. But then he thought of the fortune he had accumulated, the years of sacrifice, the need to preserve it all for someone worthy, someone who could carry on the Marcondes name with the necessary competence. The afternoon was fading fast, and the shadows inside the barn lengthened. Ted started the saw, and the roar of the engine cut through the silence of the property. The strident noise echoed off the wooden walls, and finally Isadora reacted. Her eyes widened, and she took a few steps back, leaning against the far wall. It was at this moment that everything changed. A violent crash made the barn boards tremble. The double doors burst open with brutal force, and a white figure erupted like lightning. It was a horse, a white stallion of medium build, about 8 years old, its defined muscles tensed from a desperate run. Its black eyes shone with an almost human determination. The animal lunged at Ted with a fury that seemed to understand exactly what was happening. Its front hooves struck the man's chest with enough force to knock him down, causing him to drop the saw, which fell to the ground still running, slicing through the air with its menacing hum. Ted rolled on the ground, trying to recover, but the horse positioned himself between him and Isadora, whinnying loudly and pawing the ground. The girl, for the first time in weeks, showed a clear reaction. She ran towards the animal, hugging one of its front legs with surprising strength for someone so small. The farmer got up staggering, dirt clinging to his shirt and face. His eyes, burned with hatred as he realized that his plan had been ruined by an animal. He tried to advance again, but the horse proved relentless, charging at him whenever he approached the child. Realizing that he couldn't complete his mission at that moment, Ted retreated, panting and furious. He turned off the saw and put it away quickly, his eyes never leaving the unlikely pair. The horse remained alert, its dilated nostrils picking up every movement, every intention. When Ted finally left the barn, defeated for the first time in decades, he didn't imagine that this would be just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Isadora remained next to the horse, and for the first time since receiving the medical diagnosis, something like a smile appeared on her childish lips. Night was falling in West Virginia, and in the abandoned barn, an impossible friendship had just been born in the darkest moment of a 4-year-old girl's life. The first hours after the confrontation in the barn were pure confusion for Isadora. The horse stayed by her side, but she didn't fully understand what had happened. Her mind, constantly clouded by the medication her father gave her daily, processed information slowly and fragmented. Ted had returned to the main house in a state of contained fury. His clothes, dirty with dirt, betrayed the confrontation, but he couldn't explain to anyone what had really happened. The ranch hands watched him curiously as he passed through the kitchen, but none dared to question him. They knew the boss's explosive temper well. For 3 days, Ted worked out a new strategy. He couldn't just make Isadora disappear overnight without raising suspicion. He needed a more elaborate plan that would allow him to maintain his reputation intact in the community. That's when he decided to spread a distorted version of the facts. On the morning of the 4th day, Ted headed to downtown Charleston with a dejected and worried look. He visited Big Joe's bar, a place where the men of the area gathered to talk about local events. In a trembling voice and apparently teary eyes, he told his version of the events. "My Isadora is going through very difficult times," he said, holding a glass of bourbon with hands that trembled theatrically. "The doctors said she may have violent episodes because of her condition. Yesterday she had a terrible outburst, screaming and thrashing. When I tried to calm her down, she ran into the woods. I'm desperate." The men present in the bar listened carefully, some shaking their heads in understanding. Ted's story sounded convincing, especially because everyone knew about the girl's developmental problems. No one questioned the details, and soon the farmer's version spread through the town like absolute truth. Meanwhile, Isadora wandered through the dense woods surrounding the property. The horse hadn't abandoned her for a moment, guiding her along trails that only he knew. The girl stumbled constantly on roots and stones, her small legs struggling to keep up with the animal's pace. Her clothes tore on the thorns, and scratches appeared on her arms and legs. The first day in the woods was the hardest. Isadora didn't know how to find water or food, and her thirst became increasingly intense. The horse led her to a small stream hidden among the trees, where she drank water for the first time in almost 24 hours. The crystal-clear liquid went down her parched throat, as if it were the most precious of treasures. On the second night, the temperature plummeted drastically. The Appalachian Mountains harbored a cold that cut to the bone after the sun went down. Isadora, wearing only her thin dress, began to tremble violently. It was then that the horse demonstrated touching intelligence. He lay down on the ground, forming a protective circle around the girl, his large, warm body serving as a shield against the icy wind. During the early hours of the morning, Isadora developed a high fever. Her small body burned, and she babbled nonsense in the midst of delirium. The horse remained still, only raising his head occasionally to check if she was still breathing. His nostrils touched the child's face delicately, as if to convey some comfort. On the 3rd day, the situation became critical. Isadora could barely stand, and her skin was pale as paper. She hadn't eaten anything substantial since she left home, just some wild berries that the horse had found. Her malnutrition worsened rapidly, and the animal seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. It was then that the first rumors began to circulate in the region. Beth Carter, a 38-year-old laundress who lived on the outskirts of Charleston, had heard strange stories from her neighbors. They spoke of a dirty and injured child being seen near the woods, always accompanied by a white horse. Beth knew suffering well. She had lost her own daughter, Clara, 3 years earlier, a victim of pneumonia that she couldn't treat properly, due to lack of resources. Since then, something in her heart broke whenever she saw a child in difficulty. The stories about the mysterious girl aroused in her a restlessness that she couldn't ignore. Unlike the men who frequented Big Joe's bar, Beth distrusted Ted's version. She knew him by sight, knew of his reputation as a temperamental and greedy man. Furthermore, her experience as a mother told her that children with developmental problems rarely ran away from home alone. There was something strange in that story. On the afternoon of the third day, Beth decided to investigate on her own. She took a basket with some bread and a bottle of water and headed to the area of the woods where the sightings had been reported. She walked slowly, calling out softly, hoping that her female voice would be less threatening than a male presence. It was near the stream that she finally found them. Isadora was lying on the bank, unconscious, while the horse stood guard beside her. The scene broke Beth's heart. The girl was unrecognizable. Dirty, injured, with parched lips and a face flushed with fever. When Beth approached, the horse immediately placed himself in a defensive position, whinnying softly as a warning. But there was something different in his posture. It wasn't pure aggression like the one he had shown with Ted. It was cautious protection, as if he were evaluating the intentions of that unknown woman. Beth stopped a few feet away and crouched down, extending her empty hands, to show that she posed no danger. Her voice came out in a maternal whisper, "It's okay, honey. I came to help you." The horse watched her every move, his attentive ears picking up every nuance of her voice. Slowly, as if making an important decision, the animal took a half-step back, allowing Beth to approach the unconscious child. Beth approached Isadora with slow, deliberate movements, aware that the horse was watching her every gesture. The girl was in a deplorable state. Her breathing was irregular, and small groans escaped her parched lips. When Beth gently touched the child's forehead, she felt the intense heat of the fever burning through her pale skin. "My God," she murmured, recognizing the signs of severe dehydration. The painful experiences she had lived caring for her own sick daughter had taught her to identify when a child was in real danger. The horse allowed her to lift Isadora in her arms, but didn't move away for a moment. When Beth started walking towards her house, the animal followed her closely, its hooves making little noise on the forest floor. It was as if he had made the conscious decision to trust that woman, at least temporarily. The walk to Beth's house was slow and arduous. Isadora weighed too little for a 4-year-old child, clear evidence of her malnutrition. Beth had to stop several times to rest, and at each stop, the horse positioned himself nearby, checking the girl's condition with his delicate nostrils. Beth's house was on Elm Street, an ironic name for a dirt road surrounded by simple and humble houses. It was a small building, with 2 bedrooms, a living room that also served as a kitchen, and a backyard where she hung the clothes she washed to earn a living. It wasn't much, but it was clean and welcoming. When they arrived at the gate, the first problem arose. The horse was too big to enter through the front door, and Beth realized that he had no intention of separating from Isadora. After a few minutes of reflection, she decided to open the backyard gate and allow the animal into the outdoor area of the house. Beth took Isadora to her own room and placed her on the bed with extreme care. The girl remained unconscious, her breathing rapid and shallow. First, she needed to lower the fever. She prepared cold compresses and began to apply them to the child's forehead, alternating with small sips of sugary water that she dripped delicately between her half-open lips. Throughout this process, the horse remained in the backyard, but strategically positioned by the bedroom window. His head appeared constantly on the sill, watching Beth's every move. It was evident that he didn't fully trust the situation, remaining in a constant state of alert. The first hours were critical. Isadora alternated between moments of feverish delirium and periods of worrying unconsciousness. Beth didn't sleep that night, applying compresses, offering water, and whispering words of comfort that she hoped would somehow reach the girl's consciousness. It was during the early hours of the morning that something surprising happened. Isadora opened her eyes for the first time since Beth had found her, but instead of looking for the face of the woman who was taking care of her, her eyes went immediately to the window, looking for the horse. When she saw him there, a sigh of relief escaped her lips, and she tried to move towards the window. "Easy there, little one," Beth said softly. "He's right there. He's not going anywhere." But Isadora didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the animal and gradually became glazed again. It was as if she couldn't process the presence of anyone other than the horse. Beth began to realize that the trauma the girl had experienced was deeper than she had imagined. In the following days, a strange routine was established in the house. Beth took care of Isadora, feeding her thin broths and water, changing her dirty and injured clothes. But the girl only showed any reaction when the horse was visible. If he moved away from the window, Isadora became agitated and cried silently. The animal, in turn, developed its own care rituals. Every morning, he walked to the window and remained there for long periods, as if he were standing guard. At night, he lay down in the backyard so that he could see the room, keeping watch until dawn. Isadora's physical recovery was gradual. After a week, she was able to sit up in bed and accept solid food, although she was still very thin and weak. But her emotional recovery was another matter. She didn't speak, didn't answer questions, and rarely showed any emotion other than an evident connection with the horse. It was at this time that Beth began to notice disturbing details. When she helped Isadora take a bath, she found strange marks on her arms, small puncture wounds that looked like injections. There were many, some already healed, others more recent. For a 4-year-old child, that amount of marks was highly suspicious. Even more disturbing were the empty vials she found in the pocket of Isadora's dress. They were small glass containers with medical labels, but the names of the medications were completely unknown to Beth. She carefully kept the vials, sensing that they might be important. Meanwhile, in town, rumors about the missing girl continued to circulate. Ted maintained his charade of a worried father, regularly visiting the local sheriff's office to report that there were still no signs of his daughter. But inconsistencies began to emerge in his story. Carol Sanders, Beth's neighbor and one of the most observant women on Elm Street, had noticed strange movements in the house next door. She occasionally saw a child in the window, always accompanied by the shadow of a large animal. Carol was known for her photographic memory for faces, and something about that child intrigued her. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the situation took a dangerous turn. Carol was hanging clothes in the backyard. When she saw Isadora more clearly, the girl was sitting at the window, looking at the horse in the yard, and for a moment her face was completely visible. Carol froze. She immediately recognized the child from the photographs that Ted had spread around town, claiming that she had been kidnapped during her escape. Without wasting time, she ran downtown and told everything to Ted himself, hoping to receive some reward for her discovery. Ted's reaction was one of poorly disguised satisfaction. He finally knew where to find Isadora. But he couldn't simply show up at Beth's house demanding his daughter back. That would raise too many inconvenient questions. He needed a more subtle approach. That same night, 3 men gathered at Ted's ranch. They were local thugs who occasionally did dirty work for ranchers in the area. Ted instructed them carefully. They should recover the girl without causing too much of a stir, claiming that they were concerned relatives who had finally found the missing child. What none of them expected was that a white horse would become the biggest obstacle of their lives. The 3 men arrived on Elm Street in the early hours of Friday morning, when shadows still dominated the humble houses in the neighborhood. Joaquin, Arnie, and Nestor were known in the area for solving problems that required more muscle than conversation. Ted had chosen well. They were discreet and efficient. Joaquin, the leader of the group, had devised a simple plan. They would approach Beth's house, pretending to be Isadora's relatives, grateful that she had taken care of the girl. Once inside, they would take control of the situation and take the child away before any neighbors could interfere. What they didn't know was that the horse had developed an acute sensitivity to detect danger. During the days of constant care for Isadora, his protective instincts had intensified even further. The night before, he had already shown signs of restlessness, pacing back and forth in the backyard and keeping his ears perked up. Beth woke up to the sound of cautious footsteps approaching her house. It was about 5 in the morning, an unusual time for visitors. She got up slowly, trying not to make noise, and peeked through the crack in the living room curtains. 3 figures were moving towards her gate, and something in their furtive movements immediately alerted her. Her first instinct was to protect Isadora. The girl was sleeping soundly in the bedroom, finally getting adequate rest after days of recovery. Beth ran there and shook her gently. "Wake up, honey. We need to get out of here." Isadora opened her eyes, still confused by sleep, but immediately looked for the window where she always saw her companion. The horse was not in sight, and this made her instantly alert. It was as if she had learned to interpret the signs of danger through the animal's behavior. Joaquin knocked on the front door with calculated force, not too loud to wake the neighbors, but enough to be heard clearly. "Mrs. Carter, we're family of the girl. We've come to get her." Beth felt her heart race. She didn't believe that story for a second. During all the weeks she had taken care of Isadora, no relative had appeared looking for her. Furthermore, something in Joaquin's voice sounded false and threatening. "I don't know you," she shouted through the locked door. "Come back in the morning with documents that prove what you're saying." It was then that they heard the first whinny. The horse had appeared in the backyard, and his posture indicated extreme aggression. His dilated nostrils sniffed the air, picking up the scent of strangers with hostile intentions. Arnie, who had positioned himself at the back of the house to block any attempt to escape, was startled by the size and intimidating appearance of the animal. "There's a horse back here," he whispered to his companions, "and he doesn't look friendly at all." Joaquin lost patience. They didn't have time to negotiate. With a brusque movement, he kicked the front door, which gave way easily due to its simple construction. The noise echoed through the small house, definitely waking up all the nearby neighbors. Beth picked up Isadora in her arms and ran towards the back of the house, but stopped abruptly when she saw Arnie blocking the back door. The girl, feeling Beth's despair, began to tremble violently in her arms. It was at this moment that the horse made a decision that would change everything. With a powerful leap, he jumped the low fence that separated the backyard from the area of the house, landing directly between Arnie and the door. The man recoiled instinctively, but wasn't fast enough. The animal rose on its hind legs and attacked, with its front legs, hitting Arnie in the shoulder with enough force to knock him down. The man screamed in pain and rolled on the ground, trying to get away from the hooves that threatened to trample him. Joaquin and Nestor burst through the house, looking for Beth and Isadora. When they reached the back and saw the scene, they were momentarily paralyzed. The horse had positioned himself defensively in front of the door, and his eyes shone with an almost intelligent fury. "Shoot that pest!" shouted Arnie, still on the ground and holding his injured shoulder. But Joaquin hesitated. Gunshots would alert the entire neighborhood, and they needed to keep the operation discreet. Furthermore, the animal was too impressive to be killed unnecessarily. It was worth a fortune on the market. In that moment of hesitation, Beth took the opportunity to act. She knew every corner of her house and backyard. There was an opening in the fence on the right side, hidden by bushes, which she occasionally used to pass to the vacant lot next door. With Isadora firmly in her arms, she ran in that direction. The horse, as if perfectly understanding the plan, created an even greater distraction. He charged at Nestor, who was trying to get around his position, forcing all three men to focus on defending themselves instead of chasing the fugitives. Beth managed to pass through the opening in the fence and ran across the vacant lot towards her comadre's house, 2 blocks away. Isadora didn't cry, but clung to Beth's neck with desperate force. It was as if she knew instinctively that those men represented the same danger she had faced in the barn. The horse kept the thugs busy for a few more crucial minutes before taking a spectacular leap over the fence and sprinting after Beth. His speed was impressive, and he quickly caught up with them, running alongside them like a 4-legged bodyguard. When they finally arrived at Beth's comadre's house, Rosa, it was almost dawn. Rosa received them without asking questions, recognizing the despair on her friend's face. But she knew they couldn't stay there for long. If the men were really determined, it wouldn't take them long to search the nearby houses. "You need to take her far away from here," Rosa said as she prepared a strong coffee. "My brother Seb has a farm near Parkersburg. It's far enough away for you to be safe." Beth agreed, but looked worriedly at the horse, who remained in Rosa's backyard, clearly agitated. How would they transport an animal that size? And more importantly, would Isadora separate from him? The answer came from the girl herself. For the first time since Beth had found her, Isadora spoke. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper, but the words were clear. "He comes with us." They were the first words she had uttered, and they carried a determination that surprised all the women present. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Isadora would not separate from her protector, no matter what happened. Meanwhile, at Beth's house, the 3 thugs were reporting the failure to Ted by telephone. Joaquin was furious. Arnie needed medical attention, and Nestor swore that he would never face that demonic horse again. Ted listened to everything in silence, his anger growing with each word. Not only had they failed to recover Isadora, but now the situation had become much more complicated. Beth knew she was being hunted, and that meant she might seek help from the authorities. He needed a new plan, more elaborate and definitive, and this time nothing and no one, much less a horse, would stop him from solving the problem that Isadora represented forever. The journey to Seb's farm was a 3-day odyssey that tested the limits of endurance of everyone involved. Rosa had managed to get a truck borrowed from a neighbor, but transporting the horse along with Beth and Isadora required creativity and courage. The animal, initially reluctant to enter the truck bed, only agreed when he saw Isadora climb in. First, Sebastian "Seb" Carter, Beth's younger brother, was 42 years old and lived a simple life on his property near Parkersburg. He was a reserved man who raised a few head of cattle and grew corn to survive. When he saw the truck arriving with his sister, an unknown child, and an imposing horse, his first reaction was distrust. "Beth, what's this all about? Who is this?" "A girl," he asked, as he watched Isadora get out of the truck with still unsteady movements. The child had lost even more weight during the trip, and her pallor was worrisome. Beth told her brother the whole story, from the moment she found Isadora in the woods to the thugs' invasion in the early hours. Seb listened in silence, his face becoming increasingly serious as he understood the gravity of the situation. "You're bringing trouble to my house," he said finally. "If this Ted is as dangerous as you say, he won't give up easily." But it was. When he saw the interaction between Isadora and the horse that Seb changed his mind. The girl, exhausted from the trip, leaned against the animal and fell asleep standing, resting on his front legs. The horse remained still as a statue, bearing the child's weight with infinite patience. It was a touching scene that melted the farmer's hardened heart. "All right," he said, sighing. "You can stay. But if trouble comes, you get out of here immediately." The first days on the farm brought a deceptive sense of security. Isadora began to show signs of improvement, walking through the pasture, accompanied by the horse, and even flashing a few rare smiles when the animal did something particularly affectionate. Beth took the opportunity to show Seb the vials of medication she had found. "I've never seen these names," he said, examining the labels, "but my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, worked for many years as a nurse at the hospital in Parkersburg. Maybe she knows what they are." Mrs. Higgins, a 67-year-old lady with completely white hair, analyzed the vials with growing attention. Her eyes widened when she recognized some of the names. "Good heavens," she murmured. "These are heavy sedatives. Some are used to calm adult psychiatric patients. For a child that age, that's a crime." The revelation hit Beth like a punch in the stomach. Ted not only mistreated Isadora, he systematically drugged her to keep her in a state of submission. The injection marks, the excessive passivity, the apparent cognitive impairment, it all made sense now. "How long has she been taking this?" asked Mrs. Higgins. "I don't know," Beth replied with tears in her eyes, "but by the marks on her arms, it must have been a long time." Mrs. Higgins explained that abrupt withdrawal from these medications could cause severe symptoms, including seizures and high fever. Careful medical monitoring was necessary, but taking Isadora to a hospital would mean exposing her to the risk of being found by Ted. It was during the second week on the farm that the withdrawal symptoms began. Isadora woke up one morning with violent tremors and a high temperature. Her small body writhed in bed, and she babbled disconnected words in the midst of delirium. The horse, who'd become accustomed to grazing freely around the property during the day, immediately sensed that something was wrong. He positioned himself under the window of the room where Isadora was, whinnying softly in sounds that seemed like laments of concern. For 3 terrifying days, the girl fought against the effects of drug withdrawal. Beth didn't leave her side, applying cold compresses and forcing her to drink small sips of water. Seb, seeing the child suffering, took several risks to get medications that could relieve the symptoms without attracting official medical attention. On the most critical night, when Isadora's fever reached dangerous levels and she went into convulsions, the horse did something extraordinary. He began to walk in circles in the yard, his hooves beating on the ground in a constant and hypnotic rhythm. The sound seemed to calm the girl, who gradually stopped struggling and fell into a deep sleep. Seb watched the scene through the window, incredulous. "I've never seen anything like it," he murmured to Beth. "It's like he knows exactly what to do." Meanwhile, almost 200 miles away, Ted intensified his search. He had hired a private investigator from Charleston, an experienced man in finding people who didn't want to be found. The clues were few, but Ted was willing to spend any amount necessary. The investigator, named Darrell, was meticulous in his work. He interviewed Beth's neighbors, traced her family connections, and discovered the existence of Seb. It was only a matter of time before he arrived at the farm. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Darrell appeared on the property, pretending to be a buyer interested in cattle. Seb, suspicious by nature, greeted him with forced cordiality, but revealed nothing about his guests. Darrell, however, was observant. He noticed children's clothes drying on the clothesline, saw the white horse grazing in the back of the property, and heard the muffled sound of a female voice coming from inside the house. He didn't need more evidence. That same night, he called Ted with the exact coordinates of the farm. The rancher listened to the information with grim satisfaction. This time, he himself would resolve the situation. He wouldn't trust incompetent thugs. Ted spent the night preparing his equipment. He would not only take weapons, he would also carry a syringe with a lethal dose of the same sedative he had used on Isadora for years. His story would be simple. He found his kidnapped daughter, but she was so traumatized and violent that he had to sedate her to transport her safely. An accident with the dosage would be regrettable, but understandable. On Friday morning, Ted set off towards Seb's farm. He was determined to solve Isadora's problem once and for all, and this time, not even a protective horse would stop him. What he didn't know was that Isadora, finally free from the medications that had clouded her mind for years, was beginning to demonstrate surprising intelligence. And the horse, as if sensing the proximity of danger, had become more vigilant than ever. The final confrontation was approaching, and none of those involved imagined how it would change their lives forever. Ted arrived at Seb's farm at noon on Saturday, driving a black pickup truck with tinted windows. He parked a few yards from the gate, watching the property for signs of life. The silence of the afternoon was deceptive. He could see the white horse grazing peacefully in the back of the land, confirming that he was in the right place. Inside the house, Isadora was playing on the living room floor for the first time in weeks. Her mind, finally free of sedatives, was processing the world with a clarity that surprised everyone. She had begun to speak more, asking simple questions, and demonstrating a natural curiosity that had been suppressed for years. "Aunt Beth," she said with her still weak voice, "why did Daddy give me those medicines that burned?" The question broke Beth's heart. The girl was beginning to remember fragments of what she had suffered, and each recollection was proof of the horror she had gone through. Seb was in the backyard repairing a fence when he noticed the pickup truck parked on the road. Something, in its strategic position, immediately alerted him. He ran inside the house and whispered to Beth, "There's someone watching the property. I think our time is up." The horse was the first to sense the hostile presence. His ears perked up, and he stopped grazing, directing his gaze towards the entrance of the property. Slowly, he began to walk towards the house, his muscles tensed in a state of maximum alert. Ted got out of the pickup truck, carrying a .38 caliber pistol and the prepared syringe. His expression was one of cold determination. The time had come to end that situation once and for all. There would be no more escapes. There would be no more complications. When he opened the gate of the property, the metallic sound echoed through the silence of the afternoon. The horse immediately positioned himself between the house and the intruder, emitting a deep whinny that sounded like a warning of war. "Seb!" shouted Ted, his voice loaded with false authority. "I know my daughter is in there. I've come to get her." Inside the house, Isadora heard her father's voice, and her whole body began to tremble. But this time, something was different. Without the medications clouding her mind, she could clearly process the fear she felt, and more importantly, she could articulate her thoughts. "He's going to hurt me again," she said to Beth, her words coming out with a lucidity that she hadn't shown in years. "He wanted to cut me with that noisy machine." Beth was shocked. It was the first time Isadora had referred directly to what had happened in the barn. The girl was recovering not only her cognitive ability, but also her traumatic memories. Seb came out of the house with his hands raised, trying to stay calm. "Look, Ted, we don't want any trouble. The girl is well cared for here. She's my daughter," Ted yelled, pointing the gun at Seb. "And you're a kidnapper. I'm taking her away now." It was at this moment that Isadora did something that surprised everyone. She came out of the house, walking slowly towards the yard. Beth tried to hold her back, but the girl gently broke free. "No, Aunt," she said with a voice firmer than anyone expected. "I need to talk to him." When she reached the yard, Isadora stopped next to the horse. The animal immediately lowered his head, allowing her to rest her hand on his neck. It was as if they were communicating silently, preparing for what was to come. "Dad," said Isadora, her voice small but clear. "Why did you want to hurt me with that saw?" Ted was momentarily disconcerted. This was not the apathetic and confused daughter he knew. This child was speaking clearly, asking intelligent questions. How was this possible? "You don't understand anything," he said, trying to maintain control. "Come here now, let's go home." "I don't want to go," replied Isadora, her hand still resting on the horse. "You gave me medicines that made me sick. You hurt me." The child's innocent confession hit Ted like a slap in the face. If she was talking like that now, it meant she could tell others about the medicines, about the barn, about everything. She had become an even greater threat. "That's enough!" he shouted, advancing towards the girl with the syringe in his hand. "You're going to take your medicine and be quiet forever." It was then that the horse acted. With an explosive movement, he placed himself between Ted and Isadora, rising on his hind legs. Ted fired the gun, but the shot went wide of the target, lost in his surprise. The animal attacked with a fury that seemed to understand exactly the evil that man represented. His front hooves struck Ted in the chest, knocking him violently to the ground. The syringe flew away, breaking against a stone. Ted tried to get up, but tripped on a loose rock that Seb had removed from the fence the week before. Losing his balance, he fell backwards towards the abandoned well that was in the back of the property, a deep hole that had served as a water source decades before. The sound of the impact echoed through the yard. Ted had fallen into the well, and his groans of pain indicated that he was seriously injured, but alive. Seb ran to examine the situation while Beth hugged Isadora. The farmer was at the bottom of the well, with his leg clearly broken and unable to move. "I'm going to call the police," said Seb, running to the phone in the house. When the authorities arrived, they found a scene that told its own story. The vials of medication that Beth had kept, combined with Isadora's lucid testimony about the years of abuse, created a solid case against Ted. Investigators discovered evidence of the systematic poisoning of the child and found marks in the barn on Ted's farm that confirmed the attempted murder. The farmer was arrested while still in the hospital, where he was being treated for his fractures. During the legal process, which lasted for months, Ted lost everything. His properties were confiscated to pay the damages, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted murder and abuse. Beth began the adoption process for Isadora, who gradually transformed into a completely different child. Free of sedatives, she demonstrated brilliant intelligence and a capacity for recovery that impressed psychologists. The horse, who everyone discovered was called Stormy when he had run away from a neighboring farm years before, officially became part of the family. Seb built a proper stable and registered the animal in his name. A year later, the farm had transformed into a small sanctuary for injured and abandoned animals. Isadora, now 5 years old, had developed a special talent for caring for traumatized horses, using her own experience of overcoming to help them trust again. She learned to read and write with surprising speed, and doctors confirmed that her intelligence was well above average. The years of forced medication had not caused permanent damage. They had only hidden her true potential. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, while watching Isadora teach an orphaned foal to eat from her hand, Beth smiled with tears in her eyes. The girl laughed loudly, her hair shining in the sun, completely free from the horrors of the past. Stormy grazed nearby, always vigilant, but now relaxed. He had fulfilled his mission to protect the child, and now he could simply be what he had always been, a noble animal with a generous heart. The family that had formed through suffering had found its peace. And in West Virginia, where it all began, no one spoke any more of Ted Marcondes, the man who had tried to destroy his own daughter and had ended up destroying only himself.